Welcome to Sidebar for the week of October 2nd, our follow-up to episode 11, Going Forward. I'm your host, Sean Gerd.
And I'm Scott Jameson.
In episode 11, we spoke with Drew Kesse, Jennifer's father, and we talked about the investigation into her disappearance, past and present. In this episode, we're going to respond to your comments and questions as usual, but we're also going to take a moment to collect our thoughts on what we're calling the facts of the case, and more on that in just a little bit. But before we jump into the questions, I want to tell you about another podcast you may enjoy. If you enjoy Unconcluded, then you probably love true crime podcasts just like me. But what about cults? Mystery, manipulation, even murder. Cults are associated with all of these. But what really goes on inside of a cult? Specifically, what goes on inside the minds of people who join a cult or the leaders who start them? What is their story? That's something that I find fascinating, and I think that you might too. So let me recommend a new podcast to you called Cults. This podcast answers all of those questions and more. In each episode of Cults, they're going to explore the biographical profile of a cult leader and how people are persuaded and manipulated not only to join the cult, but also to commit terrible crimes. The hosts will analyze evidence, and they're going to share real audio from cult leaders and members. Their research brings to light the little-known facts about each cult as they analyze the story. You can check out episodes covering the Manson family or Heaven's Gate right now, and there's a new episode every Tuesday, including upcoming episodes on the People's Temple and others. Visit Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, and search for Cults. That's CULTS. Or you can visit parcast.com/cults to start listening right now. That's parcast.com/cults to listen right now.
Well, Sean, we don't have any voicemails this week, but we'll go ahead and jump right into the emails and social media portion of the show. We got an email from an anonymous person who sent us basically about 50 or 60 reviews on Northbridge apartments. She says she believes Erica's account of Jennifer being at Northbridge, but then she sends these reviews, and every one of them is saying basically it's the worst place to live. The people that live there are not the best crowd to be around, and obviously things have changed possibly since back then, but it was just interesting, and I wonder if we could get a take on that and what you think that might mean to Jennifer being at Northbridge Apartments, and what, if anything, any sort of an impact that might have.
Overall, I think we still have to consider that the events of that location are a possibility. And until the point comes that we can definitely rule it out, we have to keep an open mind. If you remember, this is the location where a witness claims to have interacted with Jennifer Kesse prior to her disappearance, and then possibly seen her under duress in a roundabout on January 23rd, 2006, the night, in fact. Now, if we're just considering the location itself and the reviews that you referred to, Scott, they're interesting. I mean, if you look at them, I would agree. They paint sort of an unsavory picture, so to speak, of this particular apartment building. But there's one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that, as you sort of alluded to, 2006 was very different, especially in real estate. And so while I think that this location provides Section 8 housing now and maybe isn't the best place, I'm not so sure that in 2006 that was the case. Also, personally, I'm always a bit weary of online reviews because they're always going to skew negative. People are simply going to be more likely to leave an online review after a poor experience or just kind of in a negative way overall. So let's talk about this place for a minute though. What I can update you on for the progress as far as this encounter goes overall is I've talked to Erica a few times since we published the episode. I haven't gotten much more information out of her, to be honest. Kind of what you heard is kind of where it ends. We haven't stopped looking into it, and kind of where we are is still at a roadblock, so to speak, with the records requests for the night of January 23rd. So on that front, we have no confirmation that that event actually took place, again, other than what Erica herself is saying. I've also spoken to another employee of the complex as well recently, but again, no help. So pretty much we're not anywhere closer to confirming anything. However, at the same time, we haven't been able to find any reason to rule it out. So certainly something that we have to still kind of think about in the back of our minds. And when Scott and I start getting to the point, which it's coming up pretty soon here, where we're going to start laying out some scenarios or some different theories that we have, I think that this is going to play a part, or this location is going to play a part in that. This is something that we still feel like we have to consider as a viable possibility of something that happened that could possibly be related to Jennifer's disappearance.
We have another anonymous email, and they ask, were dumpsters in the area around Jennifer's apartment searched? I assume there was at least one due to her living in an apartment and the fact that there was also construction happening at the same time. It could be possible that things were disposed of, or even cell phones and other belongings in these dumpsters.
I'm pretty sure that we've answered this question previously, but honestly, at times, all of them are kind of hard to keep track of. So without going back and listening to all of the episodes again, I'll go ahead and answer it, but in part because it relates to our plan for the next episode. Jennifer's condo is one of the central locations, and basically, as such, we're going to need to take another look. And so if we're talking about the dumpster, we have no confirmation on anything that law enforcement did at the time of her disappearance. And as you heard Drew mention, there's a debate about whether there are even files or notes on the early investigation to start with. That said, I have to imagine that this is something that was done, especially considering the use of tracking dogs in the investigation. So we're going to talk more about the condo and its surroundings as a whole in the next episode. But to answer your question, no, we don't have any confirmation of that, but I'd be willing to bet that that basic part of the investigation, at least, was acted on early.
The next email comes to us all the way from Chile, and it is from Juan, and he wants to know about the missing time from the video and what the basis of that assumption is, and if we are sure that there is missing time from that video. Was it speculation, or is it something that we know as a fact?
The facts of this case are few. However, based on the timestamps, there's a short period of time between the video, the released video, from the first and second clip of the POI. And so that's basically what we're referring to with the missing time. So the question becomes, what could have happened during that time? Quite possibly not much, but it would still be interesting to know for sure, because it's possible that the POI could have done something within those few seconds that could answer a question or raise a new one. And so does that part of the video even exist? And does law enforcement have it? That's the real question. And that part, obviously, we can't say for sure. As far as holding back facts, I think that's always going to be a case in the investigation. And in fact, you're going to hear that from any law enforcement officer, that they're going to hold back information that they're going to use to confirm the involvement of individuals in a crime. But it's frustrating to us and to all of you because it leaves us wondering, like, for example, what was in Jennifer's trunk? Is there anything in there that could hold clues? And right now, the only people that know that are the investigating department. So as long as this case is protected from the Freedom of Information Act because it's considered active, we're just not going to know. And it's not really a knock on law enforcement either. It's standard procedure. But it's still hard to think about the possibility of something existing that means nothing to them, but might to someone else. And that could be the break that this case needs.
Tiffany sent us an email with quite a few questions in it. She wants to know if we know the identity of the punch list man, how Mr. Kesse knows about his later arrest and what his crime was, where he is now, who employed him while he worked on Jennifer's condo, who he worked with at the condo, and what he might have looked like back then. Could he possibly be the POI in the video?
First, let me say that Scott and I debated whether or not we were going to be able to answer this question. And the reason is that we're still actively looking into this. And this is something that we don't have a lot of information on. But we decided to respond because I think a lot of you have the same questions. And so our answers here are going to be pretty vague, but we didn't want to leave it hanging as something where everyone's left wondering. What I can say right now is that this individual is a Hispanic male. And as far as his description, that's about as far as it's going to go. So you can make a decision about whether or not you think that would match the POI. As far as where he is now or who employed him, those are undetermined at this point. And Scott, it's hard because we have little information, but the information that we do have, we kind of have to keep it to ourselves at this point just because of the nature of what we're trying to do in the background. So I can't really answer those questions either because A, I don't have that information, or B, at this time it would just be irresponsible. So what I would say is to stay tuned, and as we kind of progress in that area, we'll make sure that we're sharing that information with you. Have you ever tried a kind bar? You might have seen them in your local grocery store, coffee shop, or gym. I can tell you that they make delicious, healthy snacks, and they use whole ingredients you can recognize and pronounce. So here's a special deal. If you're ready to try some tasty and healthy snacks, you can try 10 kind bars for free. All you have to pay is shipping. When you order the sample box, you'll also get to try Kind's Snack Club, where you'll receive monthly snacks at a discount and get members-only bonuses. You shouldn't have to choose between your health and taste when it comes to snacking, and that's why both award-winning chefs and nutritionists love and recommend Kind bars. I tried their 10 snack sample box myself, and I keep saying it and I'll say it again. The dark chocolate nuts is the best bar I've ever had, and I put it in my own lunchbox. To pick up your free sample box, go to kindsnacks.com/unconcluded. That's kindsnacks.com/unconcluded. Remember, it's free. Thanks to Kind for sponsoring this podcast. And remember that when you support our sponsors, you help support us as well.
Okay, we have a question from Christy on Facebook. She wants to know if the police ever looked at the backgrounds of the tenants living at Huntington on the Green and Mosaic Millennia at the time of Jennifer's disappearance. She thinks that maybe there were some sexual offenders living in the complex or people with criminal and violent pasts.
This is going to go back to kind of what I say when we're asked about anything that the police did or didn't do. It would just be guessing on our part. I think to your point, yes, there were some shady characters that lived within close proximity to Jennifer's condominium and the apartment complex where her car was found. We do know that law enforcement spoke to some of these people, but I don't think it's out of the question that many of them were not talked to. However, I don't think we can get in the habit of making assumptions that just because they have a criminal past, they would be involved in Jennifer's disappearance, but certainly they would be individuals that would need to be inspected further. So this goes back to, as I said, kind of what law enforcement did or didn't do is your guess is as good as mine.
Debbie wants to know if anyone has ever done an FBI profile on Jennifer Kesse's case.
I'm unaware of any, especially any that may be public. This is definitely something that we've considered and would love to be able to bring to the show, but our attempts at getting this done have so far kind of fallen flat. So if anybody out there knows an FBI profile or a retired FBI profile or would like to help facilitate a discussion with us, we would absolutely love to have that. So feel free to give us a call or give us an email. I think this is one of those times where we remind you that this is our podcast and not mine and Scott. So any help would be greatly appreciated.
Anne brings up a point about possibly this being a robbery gone wrong. Maybe the workers found something or saw something of value in her apartment while they were working on it and figured that, or thought maybe, that she was away on her trip and ended up with a robbery gone wrong situation.
In my opinion, this was not a robbery gone wrong for two reasons. First, to my knowledge, nothing of value was reported missing from Jennifer's condo. Second, there was items of value found in the back seat of Jennifer's car, but they were left untouched. If robbery was the motive, we'd have to expect that some of those items would have been taken. Jennifer was the target here. If I'm sure of anything in this case, that would be it.
Laylee asks if law enforcement is prevented from going back and re-questioning people every 6 months or so, like Drew had mentioned in the episode, or if it's just something that they chose not to do.
So we decided to actually ask law enforcement for an answer to this question. And the answer we got was this. If they are considered a suspect, their Miranda rights have to be read before any questions are asked, for them to be admissible in court. So with that out of the way, is law enforcement prevented from going back and asking questions? Not at all. However, the other end of that is the person has to be willing to talk. The person can obviously lawyer up or just decide not to speak at all. So it's kind of a two-way street.
Randy on Facebook would like to know if we think that it is more of a situation with a complete random stranger or if the abduction was by somebody close to Jennifer.
Right now, in my personal opinion, the person responsible for Jennifer's abduction knew her. I don't believe that it was random. That doesn't mean that this person was close to her, as you said. It may be someone who knew her very casually, like, for instance, a worker that she'd interacted with in her condo or someone from work. I think my answer falls in between random stranger and someone close. But again, that's my opinion. There's nothing to rule out the other possibilities. But for me, and everything that we know about Jennifer's disappearance, it just seems likely that the person responsible or people responsible for her disappearance knew her in some way.
Betty Jean on Facebook wants to know about the quote-unquote hole in the fence that the POI scent went back through and what was on the other side.
The exact location of the hole in the fence, or kind of where the fence was down within a matter of feet, has not been determined. That's something that we can't nail down 100%. What we know is that it was past the main entrance, walking in an east to west direction on Conroy. To me, the logical answer here is that it was near the area where the pond sits on the southwest corner of the property. The same pond that Jennifer's condo overlooked. Now, I can't be sure of that 100%, but if you look at the area that is past the gate, on that part of the property, the pond takes up a good portion of it. So if you're looking at the likelihood of where it would have been, that's probably pretty close.
Shannon on Facebook brings up the point about Jennifer's car being wiped down and how there wasn't very much physical evidence in the car, just one latent print. And she would like to know if the police or anybody else possibly found a glove or gloves nearby.
Not that I'm aware of. There has never been mention of gloves by law enforcement or anyone else connected to the case. But as you mentioned, with the lack of fingerprints in the car, it's a strong possibility. But the good news is that law enforcement did find a print. The problem is, so far there haven't been any matches. But keep in mind that some individuals we've discussed in this case have been arrested in the past, so their fingerprints are on file, but they haven't been matched to the sample that law enforcement has. Just something to think about. I mentioned at the top of the show that I wanted to touch on what we are referring to as the facts of the case. All of the things that we've discussed on the podcast so far. For those nearly 4,000 of you who are on our Facebook group, you can find much of this in a document that is maintained and posted there, called Known and Debunked Facts. You may have already read it. But for the other 90% of you who aren't in that group, we thought that this might be beneficial. And so we wanted to take the second part of this sidebar to lay it all out. So for those of you who may need a review, or those of you who may have missed it, continue on. And if you feel like you're up to date on all the information, you may just want to skip ahead. This is going to be just the basics. The details can be found in the document. Let's start at the beginning. Jennifer was reported missing on January 24th, 2006. But the last time anyone heard from her was around 10 p.m. the night before, when she spoke with her boyfriend on her landline. Jennifer's car was parked by a person of interest on the day she was reported missing, the 24th, at around noon, at the Huntington on the Green, just over a mile away from her condo. This person was captured on surveillance video that appeared to show them wearing white clothing. However, the camera was determined not to capture color correctly. Additionally, the height of the person of interest was estimated by law enforcement to be between 5'3" and 5'5", but we believe it's possible they may be a little bit taller. Whether this person of interest is a male or female is unable to be determined from the video. Also, the person of interest was tracked by bloodhound from where the car was parked to the back steps leading up to Jennifer's condo. And mostly, that's where the trace of the person of interest ends. I want to also touch on some other points of interest, including the cell phones and Jennifer's car. In fact, let's start with the car. Jennifer had a black Chevy Malibu, which was found on January 26, 2006, 2 days after it was parked by the person of interest. The only evidence recovered from the car was a single fiber and a latent print. There were valuables left in the car, as we mentioned earlier, which suggests probably not a robbery motive. Now, police did process the car, and the contents of the trunk remain with the Orlando police to this day. Also, when the car was found, the seat, the driver's seat, was pushed back and the doors were locked. The car also had daytime running lights, which can be seen in the first frames of the person of interest video. Lastly, the toll transponder in Jennifer's car last went through the toll booth on her way home from work at about 6:15 on January 23rd. It was the toll booth she normally went through on her way home from work. It was not recorded going through any other tolls. And what about those cell phones? The two that are still missing to this day. Jennifer's was a Verizon LG VX4500, and her brother's friend's was a Nextel phone. As you heard in the last episode, Drew Kesse remembers being told that they were destroyed or the battery was removed around 10:40 p.m. the night of January 23rd. But the validity of that data is in question, and law enforcement no longer considers it to be relevant. No phone records have been released by law enforcement, and so on those, we're in the dark. And finally, the known items to be missing, along with Jennifer, and along with those two cell phones, include her driver's license, keys and purse, as well as her iPod that she always had with her. Also of note, contrary to internet speculation, her key fob hasn't been found. Also missing were her new snakeskin shoes and her work briefcase. But as you heard from her friends, that's something that she would leave in the car at times. And something that was reported missing at one time, but was actually found in her condo just after her disappearance, was her past, present, and future necklace. There is a ton more information on that document. So again, I encourage you guys to check that out because it can answer a lot of the questions that we get. That's going to wrap it up for this Sidebar episode. We'll be back next week with our next regular episode. We're going back to Jennifer's last known whereabouts, her condo building. There's information there that we need to review, and there's more considerations that we need to think about. As always, if you know something about the disappearance of Jennifer Kesse, the time to come forward is now. Call the Orlando Police Department and ask to speak to the detectives in charge of this case. 11 years is far too long to wait for answers. As always, thanks again to all of you who are along on this journey with us. Thanks to Richard and Stephanie for being our most recent Patreon supporters. If you'd like to support the show, you can search for Unconcluded on patreon.com. Music in this episode by Lee Rosevere. We'll see you next time.